Hi, and welcome to Nuclear Reactions. This is show number 1. My name is Charlie Vaughan. This is my dog Peaches, and we've been off the air for quite a while. You might have recognized us from the Occupy Ukiah show, and now we are doing a new show called Nuclear Reactions. You haven't seen Fukushima much in the news. A lot is still happening. We're going to be covering a lot of Fukushima information on this show. We're also going to be talking about nuclear reactors in general here in the US, around the world, and things like that. So we'll also hopefully be getting some interviews with people involved in monitoring, people involved in nuclear activism. We'll be trying to get out on the sidewalk and talking to people. And also encouraging your feedback. I'll be giving contact info on that later. So it's good to be back on. And if you're watching this, it should be Wednesday at 6 o'clock, and that should be our regular time slot. So anyway, good to have you watching. And let's jump right into it. And the words of the day are Fukushima is not over. Fukushima was Japan's 911, but they call it 311. It was March of 2011 when the tsunami hit and did all the devastation at the nuclear reactors in Japan. And what we're going to do in this show is we're going to go through the steps of what happened, because a lot of people, I wear a button around town that says Fukushima is here, and people look at it and they go, "What's Fukushima?" Or, "Oh yeah, wasn't that a few years ago?" And so we're going to sort of refresh our memories so that any of you who are watching are going to be a little more educated on what Fukushima is and why it should matter to us. Let's start with ancient wisdom. There were warning stones carved by the villagers up to 600 years ago, even older, in Japan. And there's hundreds of them that dot the coast on the Japan coastline. And the warning stones, in essence, basically say, a house built on high ground is a happy home. Do not build below this line. After the earthquake, remember the tsunami. And so when the earthquake hit in Japan, there was initial damage done to the townships and the reactors and whatnot. And then a lot of people rushed home from work to check on their houses, their children, etc. And the tsunami hit about an hour or so later and drowned an awful lot of people. So these warning stones, I think basically people said, "Oh, what do those old schoolers know? You know, we're in modern times. We're pretty smart. We build pretty tough stuff." Not only did they build their town down on the coast below these stones, they built their nuclear reactors right on the coastline. Not only that, but the reactors originally, the cliff where they were built was very high. They cut that cliff down to be closer to the ocean so that it would be easier for them to draw up seawater, cheaper. So they started cutting corners and saving money from the very inception of the building of these reactors. And that is what industry is all about, and that is what the nuclear industry is all about. In a technology that demands perfection, these companies are running on a budget and they're cutting corners, and that's exactly what they did in Fukushima. So they ignored the warning stones. And this huge tsunami hit the region. How big was this tsunami? Well, they said it was enormous. Actually, this tsunami that hit in 2011 was only 15 meters high. Now that's pretty big. But in geological history, the largest tsunami on record that hit the region was almost 40 meters high. That's over twice the size of the tsunami that hit this region. So if a really large tsunami had hit, not only would the basements have been flooded, but the entire reactor buildings would have completely been underwater. So this is just a little bit more of us paying attention to history and not being quite so full of bravado when it comes to us building our reactors. Maybe we should pay attention to some of the geological history of seismic activity, tsunami activity, and things such as that. That was not done in Japan. So this enormous tsunami swept in, did a lot of damage, and over the next 48 hours, the reactor vessels, the cores overheated. The backup generators that send cooling water through the cores broke down because they were flooded with seawater. There was a whole chain reaction of errors that were built into the design that they did not plan for. And had they done a little paying attention to history, this image that you're seeing on the screen right now would not have happened. And each one of the 4 reactors that were affected, reactor 1, 2, 3, and 4, all had hydrogen explosions. And that was caused by a buildup of hydrogen gas in each of the buildings because all of the cores overheated. And so I think you may remember back in March of 2011, the images of those explosions on camera. Live on camera, they showed those explosions from Japan. And those were a very ominous report from what we are now dealing with and what we will be dealing with for the coming decades and the coming centuries as a result of this accident. So as a result of these explosions, what we ended up with was devastated buildings. It absolutely wiped out the structures of units 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you can see some of those. Dave will bring those up on the screen. We saw them a little bit earlier. All those nice gleaming buildings that were running and purring along just perfectly suddenly were reduced to twisted metal, broken electronics, and malfunction. They brought in fire boats to spray water so it would trickle down into the cores. They were really flying by the seat of their pants. They tried to fly over it with helicopters and drop water in. Everything was too hot. It was ineffective. So basically, we ended up with devastated reactors, which is exactly what can happen. Which is exactly what can happen in all technologies. We just spent a lot of time today setting up this TV show, having a number of technological glitches, and we had to figure out what was going on. Well, that's all well and good, but if you're running nuclear reactors, you have to be absolutely perfect, and your backup systems, should you make small errors, have to be exactly perfect and online. And if they're not, you're going to end up with a meltdown. So that's exactly what happened in Japan. We had not only one meltdown, we had 3 full core meltdowns. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. What happened after the meltdowns, and as a result of them trying to control the leakage of water and many things that were malfunctioning at the reactor site there, is they had to come up with all kinds of clever solutions. And these clever solutions amounted to workers running around in radiation suits, hooking up hoses. And a lot of this is hosing like you will see hooked up to swimming pool pumps and whatnot. Hooking up hoses, some of these are held up by ropes. They're doing welding on site. They are pumping radioactive water into tanks and storing that water in tanks on site. And as of this day, this is March 14th, 2015. This was 4 years ago on March 11th. 4 years later, the radioactive tanks of water have completely covered the site. And so now they're going to probably start pumping this water into the sea, which is really not acceptable. And the other option is they're going to start appropriating land from the surrounding farmland to increase the size of the radioactive tank farms. And there, we do have a picture there of the tank farms that Dave, maybe you can pull that one up and have a look at. This was a couple years after the disaster. You see all those tanks right there? That's the Fukushima property. All those are full of highly radioactive water. And those tanks are only supposed to last maybe 50 years tops, but several of them have had leaks. They've had problems with the welds. They've had problems with the hoses. They've had all kinds of problems, and they've discovered leaks of several thousands of gallons running onto the property, which ends up running into the Pacific. They also had a clever idea to build an ice wall around the reactors. Now, the reason for that is one of the main problems here on site is that water runs from the mountains to the sea, just as it will anywhere else. Gravity takes over, and water runs from the mountains through the site and gets radioactive, it absorbs the radioactivity, and then it runs into the ocean. So presently, the current estimation that we've had for the last few years is that there are at least 300 tons of radioactive water flowing into the Pacific every single day. So their idea was to put an ice wall around the reactors and to try to freeze the earth, and that's what these hoses are that you see here. These clever scientists have hooked up all these hoses, and they're going to freeze the earth down some number of meters below the surface to try to stop the water from flowing through the site. Pretty much all the activists and all the people who were following this sort of snorted at this idea and said that's not going to work. Well, TEPCO spent millions and millions of dollars, and then they abandoned the project because, lo and behold, it did not work. And it's not to say that these are not brilliant people. These are not well-trained. They're well-trained, highly knowledgeable scientists who are doing the very best they can with a situation that has never happened before in our history. We've been running nuclear power now for about 70 years. This has never happened. And so they hook up all this crazy stuff to try to figure things out. And as a result, we end up with a real mess. And so around Fukushima Prefecture, which is like a big county, it's sort of like Mendocino County, all around the area that got irradiated from the meltdown, they have been gathering up debris from the tsunami. They gather up leaves, they gather up grass, they gather up all kinds of radioactive material, and they store it in plastic bags. And so all throughout Japan, when you drive around, you'll see these kind of bags and also plain old black plastic bags, and these bags are full of radioactive material that has been cleaned up and put in these bags. And then we might go to the next JPEG. You'll see more radioactive bags. This is just a small picture of what they are dealing with. If you were to be able to pan back on this picture, it would be literally an ocean of radioactive plastic bags. And this is not on the Fukushima site. This is in the Fukushima prefecture. And this is what people are dealing with. And I was just watching a video the other night of a woman who returned to Japan, and they had to suit up and drive into the restricted zone to visit some of the vacant ghost towns that have been evacuated. And all over the place there are these bags on corners just piled up stories high, and they're just sitting there. So it's awfully hard for them to deal with this. One of the things that they're doing is they're putting this waste on trains, and they're spreading it out around Fukushima, and they're incinerating it. And one of the traditions that Japan has, they're a very amazing culture, and this tradition is a really actually a beautiful sensibility, and that is if one person or town or area suffers, then everybody takes on a little bit of that suffering to help them. So they will maybe pitch in or do whatever they can to help that area. So what they have done with that tradition in Japan now is they are spreading the nuclear waste out around Japan and burning it, and saying that all of Japan needs to take on this burden to help Fukushima and to help the whole situation. And so what you are getting is radioactive fallout from all this incineration that's spreading its way all around Japan. It's created just horrible problems with families, with governments, with the entire situation. As a result of this, as a result of 300 tons of water a day flowing into the Pacific is getting a pretty healthy dose or unhealthy dose of radioactivity flowing into it. It's about the size of, from what I understand, of an Olympic swimming pool every day being dumped. And the reason we should be concerned about this is, as you can see there on the screen, there are currents that run directly from Japan and go directly over to the west coast of North America. And then there's a sort of circulation that goes on there. There is also that lower south equatorial and the equatorial current that ends up interacting with the upper current, and it'll end up cycling this stuff all around the planet. So not only should we be concerned here on the West Coast, everybody should be concerned on the planet, because truly there's only one ocean. Even though it's called the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean, etc., it's only one ocean. And we are daily contaminating this ocean with 300 tons of radioactive water every day. And that's the only thing that TEPCO, who is running it, who's running the cleanup, and who's the owner of the reactors, that's the only thing that TEPCO will admit to. Usually what you see with corporations, you saw it with Bhopal, you saw it with Chernobyl, you saw it with any time with the BP accident in the Gulf. Anytime there's an accident, they will say, it's not so bad, it's only this bad. And then after a few days, they'll say, it's worse than we thought, it's really this bad. And so this is what we've seen with Fukushima all along, is in stages they have said, it's worse than we thought, it's worse than we thought. And in stages they reveal the grim details, and we get to deal with them. So we should all be very concerned. And the question is, why should we care? What is it about radiation that should have us all concerned? The people will tell you, you get radiation every time you fly in a plane. You get radiation every time you go to the dentist. You get radiation, from what's called background radiation. Well, that's true. That is very true. But what happens is most scientists will agree, and there's a lot of debate on this right now, unfortunately, and I believe it's a lot of obfuscation rather than debate. It's trying to cloud the issue. There is no denying that radiation damages your DNA. And the particles have different vibrations. You've got plutonium, you've got cesium, you've got all the many, many nuclides, and some will go into your bones, some will go into your soft tissue, some will go into different organs, but all of them will break parts of your DNA. And one of the issues that's hard for us as humans to relate to is that we look around and we say, yeah, I just went to the dentist and I got a bunch of x-rays. Look, I'm fine. I'm eating dinner. The sun's shining. Everything's good. But these damages to our DNA can come up in 20 years, 30 years. They can come up in many generations later. We can pass on this genetic damage to our grandchildren. And that is why we should be really concerned. Helen Caldicott, who has been a nuclear activist for over 40 years now, she's a doctor from Australia, she said that one of the ugly facts of DNA damage is some of this DNA damage and the mutations caused from it won't be seen for maybe 20 generations. Now that's really hard for us as Americans to deal with. It's really hard for Western culture. The Native Americans used to say, whatever you do, think 7 generations. Well, how can you plan and consider 20 generations into the future that we would have mutations pop up as a result of the things that we are doing today to the planet? Humans have only been around in our present form for only about 500,000 years. Well, the plutonium that is being created today in various reactors all around the planet is going to be hot for nearly 3 million years. We're talking about over 2.5 million years of deadly DNA damage, deadly poison that is going to have to be contained and controlled from future generations. So we've really got our work cut out for us. And the Pandora's box has been opened. There is no putting it back in. Every single reactor that has been started up, Arnie Gunderson, who's a nuclear scientist and used to manage reactors, he said a wonderful phrase he said one time is, there is no off switch on a nuclear reactor. So every single one of the nuclear reactors that has been started up in our history, which is only 70 years, which in nuclear time is zip, it's like that much, there is no off switch. Every one of those reactions is going to have to be controlled and babysat for thousands of years by us. So it's just something to think about. We really need to stop right now and concern ourselves with the future of ourselves as a race and the animal life and the plant life on the planet that's going to already suffer really severe mutagenic damage from what we've already done. So we need to think about future generations. That's the only reason why I've been motivated to sit here and talk to you about this today, is for the grandkids. I would hate to have an accident here in this country to add insult to what we're already dealing with, and have our grandchildren and our babies have to be scanned like this to see whether or not they've received a deadly dose. It's a frightening thing, and it's something that we all need to think about, and we all need to, I believe we all need to pitch in. A lot of us need to pitch in. people are doing very good work on many things. I know some of you sitting on the couch say, well, I'm working on no fracking. I'm working on, improving our economics or no GMOs, and that's all good work, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. If you haven't got anything better to do with your life, join in with the nuclear activists, because we have 100 of these plants here in the country, in the United States alone. And in California, we have one remaining operating site, and that's Diablo Canyon. And lo and behold, look at that picture. Right on the coast, just like Fukushima, they put it right on the coast so they can uptake cheap, cold water from the ocean to cool the reactors. But there are 17 fault lines in the area of the Diablo Canyon reactors. There is one that's only 700 meters off the coast from Diablo Canyon, not to mention the San Andreas Fault, which is very well known, which has caused the San Francisco earthquakes, the big earthquakes in LA, things like that. We all know that we live in an earthquake zone. We live in the Ring of Fire. It's not a matter of if there's going to be a large earthquake, it's a matter of when. So it's really, really not smart of us to put these reactors right on the coast on fault lines. In fact, somebody was joking about nuclear reactors. What are they? They're a seismic fault detector. So it's like wherever they put them, that seems to be, lo and behold, later we find out, whoops, we put it right on a fault line. So the question is, what do we do? What's next? We've got all these reactors around the world. And that picture right there just got me real emotional. What do the kids do? This is nuclear activism that we are going to have to pass on to our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. We cannot just let this stuff burn and damage everybody's future. It's incumbent on us to pick it up and to step in and do something about it. We're all going to have to get up off the couch. We're still very comfortable in this country. But how comfortable are our kids in the future going to be if we do nothing? So, whenever I deal with this stuff, I always say, I'm not going to get emotional, I'm not going to get emotional. And sometimes I do. And so for show number 1, I did. And I'm not going to apologize for it. And even Peaches is shedding a few tears here. So I would encourage you in the future to tune in on this show, tune in online to all of the nuclear activism that's going on. You can tune in on Fukushima, Fukushima Response NorCal is a very good organization in Petaluma that we are in close connection with. You can go to our page on Facebook to contact us, Fukushima Solutions Now. And if you have any suggestions, if you'd like to volunteer, if you have questions, if you have criticisms, feel free to contact me through that. I'll probably be having a website, an email dedicated to this that you can write to me. And that's about what we're going to be doing for now. So in future shows, we'll be bringing out a lot more details of what's going on. We'll be bringing out, we'll be having interviews with people, and we should be spreading out a lot more information that is very valuable and things that you can do. You can't just sit there and feel helpless. You can, but it's really not a good thing for you. And so I think we're going to wrap up with that, Dave. And I want to also thank Ukiah Natural Foods, who's our sponsor. They are on the corner of State and Gobi in Ukiah, and they are a really great natural food store. that you can visit to get all your supplements and organic vegetables and organic foods and meats and dairy. I really like them. I shop there every day. I want to thank Dave Martin, Jenny Reynolds, and Vialia for pulling off our first show here. Thank you guys very much. We've got a really great engineering crew going now. I'm really excited about it. So I think we'll wrap it up, and thank you very much for tuning in. And this is Charlie Vaughan signing off, and we'll see you around town.